Hey y'all, it's Morgan and I'm about to serve up my final yarn of 2024. In my last video, I spun up a bright pinkish purple yarn as part of a project I have in mind to make a colorful wall hanging out of all handspun yarn. In this video though, I'm working on the second yarn for the project, whose colors remind me of a midnight purple sky. I'm using a beautiful fluffy fiber blend from Hidden Pastures Luxury Fiber Farm, which is where the fiber from the last video came from as well. And the fiber is prepared as a batt, B-A-T-T, which means the various fibers are layered onto a drum carder to blend and align the fibers, and then it's pulled off into a flat sheet. And then that sheet can be torn up into strips and spun into various combinations. For this batt, I'm starting by splitting it into thirds, and then I'm dividing those sections into thirds. And then, I don't know if you can tell, but one of these groups is more maroonish than the others, and I want to make sure I get that spread out throughout the entire yarn and don't run out of it. So I'm going to actually divide those again and make 6 strips. And now that the fiber has been divided, it's time to start spinning. The original plan was to take 3 strips of fiber and pull from them all at the same time to kind of get an even spread, but we'll see soon how that went. To get the yarn started, I gotta pull the leader yarn that is attached to the bobbin through the orifice hole with my cute little hook. And then I add twist to the leader with my wheel spinning in a clockwise direction. And then once some twist is built up in the leader, I can attach the fiber. I will admit I did have some trouble trying to get all 3 strips through the loop and attached and pulling back to draft the yarn, but just like with any yarn, you gotta finesse and figure out how it's gonna work in the beginning. It's not always super straightforward. For this yarn, I had a pretty bumpy start. I had trouble getting the twist right in the beginning. It was over twisting, as you can see a little bit, and then I was having trouble having all 3 attached and drafted. Like one of them would kind of just fall off, and then I'd have to try to sort of wiggle it back in there, and it was not working out very good for me. At first I tried to treadle and draft the fiber at the same time, but I was really struggling to draft the fiber fast enough. And I'm also just realizing that I never explained what drafting was if you're kind of new to spinning and that term has been confusing you, because it's not intuitive for sure, but it means to pull the fibers apart. Pretty much the whole gist of spinning yarn is to pull fibers apart into the thickness that you want. The more sparse you make the fibers, the thinner the yarn is going to be. And then you add twist to that to create strength. So if you don't add enough twist, it's going to fall apart. And if you add too much twist, it's going to have too much strength and coil on itself and not be very good. So there's a balance. But all spinning really is drafting fiber and adding twist. Eventually I figured out that this was going to be a stop and go yarn, not a continuous spinning type yarn. Basically what that means is I had to treadle a couple of times, then stop and draft, and repeat that instead of treadling and drafting at the same time, like the previous yarn I made. Also, I had to adjust and drop one of the strips of fiber. It was just too difficult to pull from the 3 at a time, and I kept losing one of them, and just trying to finagle it back in was just taking too much time and too much effort, so dropped down to 2 strips, using one of the thick strips and one of the thin maroon strips. Dropping down to 2 strips made drafting so much easier and made the whole process much smoother, even though it's not what I had originally planned. But that's all it was just a plan. It was never set in stone, so actually getting my hands in there made me realize that my original idea was not going to work how I thought. Which is totally okay, because I'd rather adjust and enjoy the process than try to really stick to the plan I made and hate every second of what I was doing. Before I finish these singles up, I want to show you a very important skill for spinning yarn, and that is how to join the fiber to the yarn attached to the wheel, whether your yarn breaks or you're just attaching new fiber to the fiber strip that you just ran out of. All you gotta do is make sure the yarn attached to the wheel is fluffed up at the broken end, and that the fiber you're attaching is also fluffy, and then you just mash the fluffy ends together and add twist, and then voila, a join has been made. This skill was really daunting to me as a beginner, but now it's practically second nature. Alright, I finished spinning the fiber into singles and now I'm ready to ply. For this yarn, I'm going to apply each bobbin of singles individually with silver metallic thread to add some star-inspired sparkle. To get started plying, I'm adding twists to the leader yarn, and this time my wheel is spinning counterclockwise. Then I attached my single and thread through the loop at the end of the leader and let the twist travel up the yarn to ply it. You can see here I'm adjusting the tension and manually winding the yarn onto the bobbin with my hand at first, and that's because the leader attached to the bobbin tends to be slippery, but once you get the first bit wound on, it's usually pretty secure and smooth sailing from there. And the tension knob I was messing with is used to adjust how much force the bobbin is using to pull the yarn onto itself. I didn't get very far before I ran into a problem. The thread was becoming a mess and winding itself around the pole it was on, but luckily it was a pretty quick fix because all I needed to do was flip the bobbins to sit the other direction. Now that I've got all the kinks worked out, it should actually be smooth sailing from here. I'm curious to know if those of you watching have ever tried spinning yarn, or if you want to try it, or if you're just like fascinated by the process but don't have a desire to try it. Let me know down in the comments how you feel about spinning. Aside from enjoying the process, I really like how unique handspun yarn is, and that it makes the things that I crochet and knit out of it like truly one of a kind. I mentioned earlier that I'm making this yarn for a wall hanging, but I've yet to decide what the design will be. I don't think I'll figure it out for sure until I finish all the yarn and know the yardage of everything, but I'm currently leaning towards some sort of moth or butterfly. So if you're curious about what this yarn will be turned into, you might want to stick around for a bit and maybe subscribe. Here is a close-up of my hand placement for plying, with the back hand separating the strands and controlling the tension from the lazy Kate, and the front hand controls where the twist travels and guides the yarn onto the bobbin. Alrighty, I've finished plying and now I'm ready to wind this off the bobbin. Which means it's time to bring out my handy dandy Niddy Noddy. Not only does it wind the yarn into a hank or a loop, but it also helps measure the yardage. This one creates loops that are 2 yards, so if you count the number of loops and multiply by 2, you get the approximate yardage. I kind of forgot to count the loops and calculate the yardage while filming, and I also forgot to measure the wraps per inch like I did in my last video, but I'll figure all of that stuff out whenever I get to the actual wall hanging. Once all the yarn is on the Niddy Noddy, it's time to secure everything. I like to cut a bit off each end and use those pieces and each end of the yarn to make 4 figure 8 ties. And now with everything secure, I can take it off the Niddy Noddy. I ended up with about 1.5 bobbins worth of yarn. I really love how the silver thread looks with the dark fiber and just all of the various colors. It's just so gorgeous, and I can't wait to see how it pairs with the yarn from my last video, the like bright pinkish purple one. I think they're going to complement each other so well. The Midnight Sky yarn was a bit over twisted in spots and generally just a bit unbalanced fresh off the wheel, but all of that should sort itself out with a hot soapy bath. For the bath, I first get a bowl with hot water that's still touchable, and then I swirl my soap in it. I really like using this Tuft Wool soap, but pretty much any soap will do. Once the water is pretty slick with soap, I add my yarn and switch it around a bit. But you don't want to aggravate it too much or you'll create a felted mess. But you want to agitate it just a little bit to help the yarn and the fiber that you twisted together hold together. But you don't want all the strands to get felted together, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense? Anyways, after that I let it sit for about 15-ish minutes. Then I start the drying process by first pressing out as much water as I can before giving the yarn a tension treatment. Now, I don't actually remember the name of this step, but it helps straighten and balance everything. Basically, you put your thumbs in either end of the loop and give it a quick, firm tug. And caution, there will probably be water flying out. But as you can see, the loop is not twisting back on itself nearly like it was before. And then I lay the yarn out on a towel that I roll up and then try to press out as much water as I can. Now there's just one last thing to do to finish this yarn, and that is hang it up to dry. I also like to put the towel I use to dry the yarn underneath it because it will drip, for sure. The water left in the yarn will collect at the bottom of the yarn, and so I like to come through every little bit and kind of rotate it so it doesn't just stay soaked on one end. I find it helps dry better. Let me know what you think of this yarn down in the comments. It feels so soft and fluffy, and I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like worked out. If you haven't checked out the video for the pinkish purple yarn that I spun for this project yet, you'll probably like it if you like this spinning video, so be sure to check that out. Thank you so much for joining me on this creative journey. I hope to see you again soon in the next video. Until then, go forth and create, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!